Ever wondered how trailblazing risk leaders navigate uncertainty with finesse and confidence? Uncover the surprising connections between their personal journey and professional prowess, and get ready to learn and elevate your risk management game with the RiskMasters podcast. Join host Julien Haye in collaboration with Risk.net as they delve into hidden gems of risk leadership through engaging conversations and thought-provoking insights from board directors to chief risk officers and business leaders.
Today's guest is Iremar Brayner, fraud manager at G2A and a seasoned leader in fraud prevention, identity verification, and risk management. Over the past 17 years, he has shaped fraud strategy for some of the world's most dynamic companies, including Farfetch, MetaMap, Didi, Zettle by PayPal, and more. From building multicultural verification teams across continents to scaling face recognition and two-factor authentication with minimal friction, Iremar has been at the forefront of protecting businesses and customers in fast-moving, high-volume environments. In this episode, we explore how fraud prevention has evolved across industries, the growing role of identity in building trust at scale, and how risk teams can collaborate deeply with product, legal, and engineering to enable both security and business growth. If you enjoyed this conversation, please follow, review, and share RiskMasters. For more insight and resources, please visit avtm.com. I'm Julien Haye, and this is RiskMasters. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this new episode of RiskMasters. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome Iremar Brayner, a fraud specialist. That's a topic we haven't covered so far on the show. So, Iremar, welcome.
Thanks for having me here, Julien. Really nice to be here and speak a little bit about fraud.
Well, you have a fantastic experience and expertise in the domain, so we will have plenty of opportunity to learn more from you. And starting with that, you've worked in fraud prevention across payment, retail, technology, ride-hailing. I'm not even sure to know what that is, actually, so perhaps you can tell us a little bit more. What's been the most defining shift in how you approach fraud strategy through all of this experience?
Okay, just on ride-hailing specifically. So this is the business model that is based on taking people from point A to point B. So if you are at the airport and you order like a car to pick you up, that's actually ride-hailing. I'm not going to mention some of the companies, but yeah, that's pretty much it.
Uber and equivalent, effectively.
So I would say that there was a moment in my career that actually it was a big shift when I noticed that fraud, it isn't only about stopping fraud. That fraud actually touches at least the three main pillars of a company, which are growth, efficiency, and customer experience. So somehow everything is related to fraud.
Oh, so, and I'd love to peel that onion a little bit more and to learn a little bit more. So when you think about growth, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, because one of the things that we do as fraud prevention is we try to stop fraud pretty much. So if people are trying to buy something and we have evidence to believe that it's not a legit customer, we are going to decline the transaction. However, if we end up doing the wrong thing, we are not letting the company to grow as expected because we are not allowing a good customer to shop. So this is how we impact growth. And it actually also touches, like the same example, touches customer experience, because imagine you're trying to buy something, you are a legit customer and you are not allowed to.
Yeah, I do find that very annoying personally when my credit card declines every 2 minutes because it's a new transaction. It's about removing friction to a large extent in terms of customer experience, isn't it?
Yeah, friction is one of the things. There's a lot of different ways to stop fraud. Of course, if we are able to do it without even the customer realize, that's the best way of doing things. And when it comes to the third pillar, which is efficiency, as I said, there's a lot of different ways to tackle fraud. If you're able to be very accurate when it comes to fraud and everything, but you're spending a lot of money doing that, it means that you're not efficient. And if we look like for the next 5 or 10 years of the company, that's not good. That's not healthy. financially speaking. That's why the way we see fraud is that it actually touches like everything in the business model.
Yeah, I had on this show someone who was talking about cybersecurity, and one of the points he made was there's a tipping point where when you have too many controls and monitoring mechanism, it actually achieves the opposite of what you'd like to achieve as well, both from a prevention, but also from a business standpoint, which I think is what you're alluding to. I think we're going to come back to that point as we go through the discussion. And I mean, you worked in different type of company sector, right? Leading fraud strategy at Farfetch to managing trust and safety where you are today, G2A, is a big move in product type and transaction scale. It's not the same. It's not the same world almost. What motivated that change from your perspective?
Yeah, so taking G2A's challenge was a very big thing for me because G2A, as the largest digital entertainment marketplace in the world, is very challenging. And I think that by taking the offer and taking the challenge, that will add a lot to my experience, to my background, and I would also be able to help G2A to learn, to grow, even in a more efficient way. So I think it was a win-win, and I'm really happy to be working at G2A.
So the challenge then.
Yeah, the challenge, because digital entertainment, it is a challenging industry. It requires a lot of understanding of the business model.
And looking back at your career, were there any pivotal case or incident that really reshaped how do you think about fraud prevention?
Yeah. I think it was. So some time ago, I was hired for a fintech company to address one specific issue. So fraudsters were using social engineering to convince people, normally on Instagram or Facebook, to share their credentials. And then afterwards, those fraudsters, they were using like this credentials to make bank transfers and things like that. And the challenging thing was we were kind of able to stop and understand the behavior, so we knew what was happening. But the challenge was, how do we do it without causing a lot of friction to customers? And at the end of the day, we decided to partner with a third-party provider and use device fingerprint to perform a frictionless authentication. By doing that, we were able to decrease that fraud case in around like 90%. So the reason why it was challenging was the company hired me to solve a problem, but they have a condition. You need to solve the problem without compromising our customer experience, or at least trying to compromise it in a very in a very smooth way. So that was really like a key moment in my career.
So putting customer front and center effectively in any remediation activities and fraud
Yeah,
prevention.
because the challenge was, if I was able to decrease that fraud trend, but I was hurting customer experience a lot, I wouldn't be solving the problem by the end of the day. So it was really challenging and difficult, but at the same time interesting to solve.
It seems there's a bit of a trade-off between how much prevention you can do and how much friction as a result you create for the customer and the impact from a P&L standpoint, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And the funny thing about it, or interesting thing about it, is that depending on the business model, and by working in different areas and business model, I kind of get that experience, is that sometimes customer, believe it or not, they are expecting some sort of friction. For example, if you're trying to transfer, I don't know, 10,000 euro from your bank account to another bank account, customers kind of, okay, the bank is gonna try to verify that transaction in certain way. But on the other hand, if you're trying to pay for a, I don't know, Netflix subscription, maybe you're not expecting to be contacted by your bank. Oh, is that you that is trying to pay for this and things like that?
It's a matter of proportionality that I see all the time in the field work. And perhaps connected to that, what's the biggest misconception people have about fraud managers and fraud prevention measures and functions?
Yeah, I think it leads back to the first question. A lot of people think that the fraud team's responsibility would be only to stop fraud. But as I mentioned, it's not. It's related to a lot of different things. And when it comes to fraud managers, I would say that a misconception that is there. People only contacting fraud managers when there's a fire. So sometimes I think all of the fraud professionals, they felt that like they were firefighters, but actually um, the stakeholders can talk to us when things are normal, just to improve a process, just to try to understand whether it makes sense to keep this process or it could be better on a customer perspective in terms of cost. I think those are like kind of misconceptions about fraud and fraud professionals.
And I suppose connected to that, there's not really a one size fits all solution, right? In all of that, how do you tailor fraud strategy to the product, payment model, and our user base?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that the concept of identity has changed a lot. So today we have a lot of data. We have millions and millions of data, and it's really difficult to come up with a very good answer on what actually a identity is. At G2A, we understand fraud prevention and risk management as a journey. So we are going to check user identity in many different moments of the journey. So like, as I said, buying like a 10-euro item is different from buying a 1,000 euro item, you know? So we understand identity or we understand fraud management as a journey. And depending on how complex that journey is, another layers of verifications will be added to that.
And I'm not sure if you have an answer to that, but just a thought crossed my mind. In that context, are the businesses expecting a certain level of fraud that they will always have to almost accept, inverted commas, simply because the trade-off to try to get rid of them would be too expensive?
I used to say that no fraud means no business. So fraud is a human thing, and it's always going to be there. So if you are trying to, and if there's money involved, there's going to be fraud. That's for sure. What we try to do is to keep the fraud levels, like generally speaking, as in a very like acceptable level because of a lot of different things like branding, customer experience, as I mentioned, financials. There's a regulated, so the payment industry is a very regulated industry. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to keep fraud levels in an acceptable level, but we are 100% aware that some level of fraud is always going to be there, like because it's just something that is 100% linked to having like a business model in place.
I suppose there's also a question of business, right? If you look into certain side of financial services, it probably will be less subject to certain type of fraud and probably more on others. And
Yep.
retail banks, payments, the Revolut of this world, etc., will all be subject to probably a very large volume of smaller fraud that you will not necessarily find in other sectors. And you mentioned identity verification. So it's becoming clearly increasingly central to fraud prevention, right? And we talk about digital identities, etc. How do you strike the right balance between security and user experience in that context? And you've already kind of alluded to that, but can you add a little bit more to it?
Yeah. So after kind of understanding the business model and the goals we want to achieve, it's important to have metrics that will address both growth, efficiency, and customer experience. Pretty much like the company strategy will tell you how much you need to push when it comes to fraud prevention. And again, a lot of people think that okay, you're gonna have like a fraud metric that is gonna tell you everything, but that's not how it works. So I think numbers and metrics, having the right metrics that will match to the company goals will tell you whether you're going to the right place or not when it comes to fraud mitigation.
Yeah, so things such as, I suppose, customer or client drop off through a purchasing or a registration journey, for example.
Yes, yes. I think that would be a good example because as I've mentioned, like fraud is a journey, and when you try to buy something and it gets declined, is not even the beginning of the journey. Actually, when you try to open the website, it is already the beginning of the journey because one of the things that companies are doing right now, they're trying to identify bots. And so when you try to open the website, that's the first step. And it doesn't end when you buy something and you are able to buy something, because after that, a chargeback can be raised. You can go to your bank and say, I did not receive the product, or I do not recognize this transaction and I want my money back. So it's a never ending journey, to be honest.
And and here, I suppose we talk about effectively digital journeys, right? We are not talking about in-person,
Mhm.
physical, paying by cash or credit card.
Yes, yes. And again, it brings a different level of complexity, because if you buy something physical, you have way more possibilities to prove whether that was delivered or not, and things like that. When it comes to digital, that's more difficult. That's more difficult. I think there's that was one of the reasons why I decided to join G2A, because I wanted to experience how challenging and difficult managing fraud in digital entertainment is.
And building on, like you were talking about biometrics effectively earlier, right? So what role does technology such as two-factor authentication, biometrics play in enabling smarter, more seamless onboarding and customer journey?
Yeah, there's a lot of not new, but technologies being used there, and it's like a double edged sword, because fraudsters are also using that. Um, to be honest, when it comes to technology and and what people are doing right now, I would say that as we've always seen, the only difference is that now um, technology is helping fraudsters to make more convincing things. So it's really difficult to distinguish what is real and what is not real. And like at G2A, we believe that it's not a thing about, like, for example, AI. If we take AI as an example, like a lot of companies are using AI to detect fraud. We don't believe that that's gonna replace humans. We believe it's a war between AI versus AI plus human, because when it comes to fraud, there's always a emotional side of it. When I say emotion, I mean that people are more likely to be scammed when there's something emotional involved. When people are struggling with financials, for example, recently there was like the crazy sales of Oasis concert. So there's a lot of fans really willing to buy the tickets. And when you're feeling like that, you're more likely to click on a shady link and spend your money on it. But that's actually fraud, you know. So that's why technology is always going to be there, and technology is going to help us to automate a lot of things, but there's always going to be a human touch to it.
It's as you said earlier, it's a never-ending story, right? Because it's a race. The smarter we get at detection and prevention, the smarter the fraudster get. In fact, I was seeing on my LinkedIn yesterday someone posting a fake restaurant receipt that they could use to scam effectively their company for expenses. So it is never-ending and multi-form now. And AI especially enables people to do things they were not able to do before.
Yep.
Or at least in a different way. So how do you measure success beyond just reducing chargeback or losses? And I think you touched on already customer experience and so on, but are there any other things you could share?
Yeah, I think if we dig deeper on metrics, for example, everybody talks about like chargebacks, for example, fraud rate and things like that. But there are other things that could be measured, like the cost of fraud. For example, how much money you are spending to prevent fraud, like amount for how many dollars you're spending per case, per transaction that is actually being checked by fraud. This is one of the things. If we go to like the experience part, a lot of people would say, okay, we're going to measure how many complaints we have in the customer service that are related to fraud, but actually how much time you take to respond to them is a very good metric to have as well. For example, at G2A, we decided to stop doing manual review because of the uniqueness of our business model. So if you're trying to buy like a game online that costs like 20 euro, you're not expecting to wait for like 2 days, 24 hours, 48 hours to have a response. So we decided to stop doing manual reviews. So all of our decisions are 100% automated, which means that takes like seconds. But if your business model is still relies on manual review, the automation rate will be a good metric, not only related to efficiency, but also related to customer experience, because as lower your manual reviewed rate is, that's better for experience for the customers.
Yeah, it's immediacy of the decision effectively, and not having to wait for several hours, not days, to actually get the transaction done, isn't it? And I mean, working on fraud means you have to bring quite a number of skills and capabilities around, right? So you've worked closely with product, legal, engineering teams for various facets of it. How can risk and fraud functions integrate effectively without slowing delivery?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And I would say that the best way of making all these teams work together is by making them share goals. If they have a common goal, it's going to be way easier for them to work together, because what normally happens is you, for example, as engineering team, you have one specific goal. Then me as fraud, I have another goal, and then like product has different goals. And if you are sharing the same goals, it's really, really key to work in a more efficient way, because we know, okay, that's the ultimate goal of the company, and that's going to be fraud contribution towards it, engineering contribution, product contribution, and then we all work together. I think that's the best way, and this is what we've been doing at G2A.
Can you share an example with us?
I would say that, remember that I've mentioned that fraud is key to the growth of the company.
Yeah.
I'll give you like a simple example. Let's suppose you work on sales. You're from the sales department, right? And then your goal is to sell like 100 items per day. However, if I do not approve most of the transactions, you're not gonna achieve that goal, right? And if I do not approve most of these transactions, we're probably gonna have a problem in customer service because they're gonna start to receiving like emails complaining about it. So if we look at a simple company goal, which is the number of sales, we all of us are going to contribute somehow. For example, you as a sales guy, you need to sell 100 items. Me as a fraud manager, I need to approve X percent of it and keep the fraud level low. And our stakeholder from customer service needs to be able to answer all of those questions from customers, from users in a specific SLA. So it's all connected.
So I will give you an objective: 95% of all legitimate transactions approved within 5 seconds. That will align the incentive, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And so can you give us an example of a cross-functional initiative that really significantly improved fraud prevention and outcomes in that context, where the teams came together toward those common objectives?
Yeah, so we have recently, so again, digital entertainment is very unique and we sell a lot of different items and we accept loads of different payment methods in different regions of the world. And recently we've been working not together to kind of break down even more our risk approach. So I'll give an example. Instead of looking at our approval rate or chargeback rate as a one, what if we break that down by product type? Maybe the level of risk, maybe the risk appetite we have for accepting payments for Netflix subscription does not necessarily need to be the same for accepting payments for gift cards. And maybe if the payment method is A instead of B, we can have a different approach. So what, in a nutshell, what we've been working on together is how do we kind of break down our risk approach? And that could be from product to region, for example, to payment methods. That really shows how unique our business model is.
And I think you might have answered the next question, but we'll see, right? Because you're in a business at G2A that has very high volume of digital transaction, right, as a digital marketplace. So what unique fraud risks come with that scale and how do you manage them?
Yeah, so I've kind of touched some of it, like the fact that we have very different product types and regions and everything. I would say that one of the things that adds a layer of complexity is our AOV. So we normally sell like low value items when it comes to money. And that's a little bit attractive for fraudsters because think as a fraudster. Let's suppose somehow you got hold of 1,000 stolen credit card information. If you try to buy like a 2,000 euro, I don't know, computer, that's going to be obvious. So probably you're gonna be rejected. However, you might try to test those cards buying something that is very cheap just to make sure the card works. And after that, you move to another product like electronics and things like that, So that kind of adds an extra layer of complexity to our business model. In short, fraudsters might try to use our platform to test stolen cards.
Interesting. You really have to put yourself into the shoes of the fraudster, don't you, to actually try to figure out what they're going to do. I've seen certain function that hire X criminals, inverted commas, organization? Because in the end, you probably get the best you can get with people who've done this stuff. Is that something you guys have done at any point?
Well, I would say that in order to tackle fraud, you need to try to think as a fraudster. So what I would do if we're trying to commit a fraud for this specific like business model. Of course, this is not something that will like solve the problems. There's a lot of different things we do, tools, technology, AI, external partners, but you need to try to think as a fraudster, to be proactive and say, okay, there's a gap here. We need to kind of fill that gap somehow. Otherwise, fraudsters are going to take advantage of it. That's natural.
And I mean, we talked about technology, right? And the fact it's a never-ending race. So what emerging fraud trends or attack vectors concern you the most right now?
I would say social engineering, as I've mentioned before, because a lot of people are really like heavy users of Instagram, Facebook, and fraudsters know that. So they use those platforms to try to trick people on sharing credentials, on like making bank transfers and things like that. This is one of the things that are very trendy at the moment. Fraud at dating apps as well. Again, going back to the topic I've mentioned about the emotional side of fraud, like a lot of people are trying to use dating apps to get money from people using the excuse that they're in love and things like that. We've been also seeing a raise in friendly fraud or first part fraud when people they buy something and then they just call the bank reporting that transaction was fraudulent, but it actually a genuine transaction. Yeah, I think and refund fraud, especially if you're selling physical items, is something that is really trending. So, for example, you buy something online, you got the item, and then somehow you try to return a fake item instead to get the money back. So you get the money back and you stay and you keep the original item.
Yeah, so I suppose for branded items, for example, it must be very tempting to do that. And I mean, again, it seems to be never ending. So what's the most important skill do you think the next generation of fraud prevention leaders need to develop in that context?
Communication. Yeah. That's a great question because a lot of people think in order to be successful in fraud and everything, you need to be very good at, for example, identifying account takeover or identity, stolen identity and things like that. But actually, I would say that the most important skill between hard and soft skills would be able to communicate and influence people in a company. That would be like, and the good thing, it applies to everything in life, not only if you want to work as a fraud professional, but if you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, that's important.
Well, and you mentioned you had to work alongside a lot of stakeholders in different fields as well to make that work. So I suppose that adapting yourself to that situation also is critical, isn't it?
Yeah, I think improving the way I communicate with stakeholders and everything, that was my biggest challenge in the beginning of my career. It's still a work in process.
And how do you stay ahead of fraudster who, and you mentioned it before, right? They keep renewing themselves, right? They don't stay still, right? So that keep constantly adapting and innovating and using probably are 2 steps ahead of everybody else in using AI for those type of stuff.
Yeah, I would say As a fraud professional, you need to be very proactive. And one thing that I've learned is that um, our fraud community is growing a lot. So people are talking to each other, which is good. Um, so you normally hear, okay, there was a fraud attack on this specific company, and the business model is not related to the business model that I'm working right now. So it's never going to happen in my business model. That's not true. That's not true. So we've seen a lot that fraudsters, they try to do exactly the same thing in different merchants, different business models. So this is one of the things that fraud professionals need to be really um, aware about is be have like the open eyes to what's happening out there, not only inside of your company, inside of your business model, but you need to be able to understand what's going on in other industries and also in the world, because um, again, when there's a economic crisis going on, as it is right now, people are also more likely to be scammed
Or perhaps to commit fraud
and
and
also
stuff.
to commit exactly and also to commit fraud. When people are struggling financially speaking, they're more likely to scam and to be scammed.
And you've touched on that, so I don't know if you will have anything else to add, but what's your views on AI's role in enabling and combating fraud beyond what you've already mentioned? Do you have anything else to add there?
No, I think, yeah, I would say that in short, and that's our vision at G2A, is that it's going to be a AI against AI plus human battle. A lot of things people are really concerned about the fact, okay, AI is going to replace humans and everything. Everybody's going to lose their jobs. Of course, that's going to happen to some of the areas, but when it comes to fraud, um, that's going to help us to use our human resources in a more efficient way when we really need humans to do it, not to do like only operational things and repetitive things, but to think, okay, how can we actually make this process better? How can we spend less money on this specific tool or things like that?
And switching to people, right? So you've mentioned if you worked, I think, across multiple continents with different cultures as well.
Mhm.
So how do you approach the development of talent in that context, especially considering, I think, the multicultural approach that and the
Mhm.
nature of fraud in that context?
Yeah, something that I also learned from great leaders that I had over the years is that you are the true owner of your career. So, regardless of your position, you need to be the one telling yourself what you're going to do next. And me, as a manager, I'm going to try to help you to develop the soft and hard skills required to the next step that you decide to go for. That's
Well,
how I see people's development.
it's like you're going to have lots of people knocking at your door to work for you now. Based on what I'm observing from a management skills perspective, it's not always what people get. And how do you foster a culture where analysts and actually people working for you feel empowered to challenge decision and share insights in relation to fraud and effectively evolving a bit practices internally?
Yeah, I think this is one of elements of our DNA at G2A is we want people challenging the status quo of things. And that's funny because normally when I'm hiring people, I like to have people on my side that think a little bit different than me. And people would ask me, why you want people that do not agree with you? And say, that's great because they help me to see the world and work in a different perspective, you know? So being open to let people ask questions and bring suggestions, I think this is something that we really do at G2A. And generally speaking, I think that's very important. If you have people with different backgrounds, different opinions, different perceptions of the world, that help a lot for a very simple reason. Users, customers, they're all different. And we need to be able to try to address all of those differences by providing like a good service, a good product.
Yeah, and adjusting the customer journey as well in the context of the circumstances of your users as well, isn't it? I think it's a good segue to start bringing the discussion to a close. If you look back again to your experience and career path, what's one fraud-related belief you used to hold and later changed your mind about?
I think, again, it leads back to the first question. In the beginning of my career, I thought it was only about stopping fraud, and that's not true. It really 100% linked to the core business of a company.
And perhaps it will be the same, but if you could give one piece of advice to someone starting in your domain today, what would it be?
Just jump in. You're going to learn a lot. It's going to be really interesting. You're never going to get bored because fraudsters never stop.
And outside of fraud and risk, what's something you're passionate about that shapes how you lead?
I think trust, because trust kind of is the basis of human relationships in general. And I love listening to people. I love listening to people because there's always something to be learned. Even if you are talking to like the more junior person at the company, they're going to have something interesting to share with you because they have a totally different perspective of the world. So I would say that trust and listening to people are things that I love.
And what's next for you in 2025 and beyond?
Well, I'm really excited to keep delivering at G2A. We have a lot of good projects in mind. We have a lot of good things to deliver. And our goals are really challenging. So my expectation is to be able to keep adding value to G2A customers.
Well, Iremar, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. You might have convinced a few people to jump on a fraud boat. So we'll see if people are knocking at your door to learn more. So thank you so much for your time today. And I hope to see you again on this show at some point in the future.
Thank you, Julien. It was really nice to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for tuning in into this episode of RiskMasters today. I hope you found today's conversation with Iremar as insightful and eye-opening as I did. From tailoring fraud strategies across industries to integrating identity verification into seamless onboarding, Iremar shared a wealth of practical experience and strategic vision for keeping businesses secure while enabling growth. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us continue bringing you top insights from industry leaders. For show notes, additional resources, and related articles, please visit daviditium.com. Stay curious, stay connected, and join us next time for more deep dives into the future of risk, resilience, and leadership. And remember, best fraud prevention isn't just about stopping bad actors. It's about creating trust that scales. Until next time, I'm Julien Haye, and this has been RiskMasters.
Thank you for joining us on RiskMasters today. If you're ready to master risk and unleash your full potential, here's how you can take the next steps. First, head over to julienhaye.com to discover even more valuable insights from our RiskMasters. We've got a treasure trove of knowledge waiting for you. Second, don't miss out on future episodes. Hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcasting platform. Stay tuned for fascinating discussions on risk management. And third, if you found today's episode valuable, please share it on social media. Help others discover the world of RiskMasters and embark on their journey of risk mastery. Remember, success favors the bold. See you on the next episode of RiskMasters.